Hello, this is Philip from Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast. I hope you've been enjoying the content of all the activities that have been happening throughout Thralloween. For this presentation, we actually interviewed with Jack and Janet from River Horse Games and World Anvil, respectively, to talk about the upcoming The Dark Crystal adventure game. This following is part one of the chat. So this interview is going to be split up into two parts for this very special video interview. And also stay tuned for the upcoming game preview that Sydnni and Janet and Jack did, just to give you sort of like a little demonstration of what you can do in the Dark Crystal adventure game. So here's part one of the interview, and hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast. I'm your host Phil, and I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast as we, of course, chat about Dark Crystal, and a very special show with us, of course, is my co-host Sydnni. So Sydnni, how are you?
I'm great. Hey everybody. I'm stoked. We're not here for me today though. We're not. So, hey, I'm here.
Because of course we got a very special guest from River Horse Games, Jack Caesar and Janet Forbes, writers of course on the Dark Crystal adventure game. First of all, I just want to say to both of you, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
I think we're both very happy to be here.
As of this recording, we'd let all the listeners know about Sydnni. We got to be a little bit involved with this adventure game as a sort of a guest contributor. So again, just want to say thank you for sort of incorporating, our little scene as part of the adventure game.
We're valid. We're so valid now.
It was a lot of fun working with you guys. Sort of working with you to create a one of the scenes in the adventure game. Taking one of those deep cuts from the lore. And working that in. Working with Janet as well, getting all of those, all the book stuff, comic stuff, and
oh my god, it was intense. It was awesome. And, poor Jack. Every week I'd be like, I found this thing in a random corner of the world. We must include it, or like a single throwaway line in the Netflix show, and I was like, this has to be a thing. Anyway, we'll talk more about that later. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of us.
I know. I mean, we've got so much to talk about with this adventure game and so many other things. I want to step back a bit because I do actually would love to know from both of you, Jack and Janet, how did you both discover the Dark Crystal? How did it came to your lives?
Oh well, I'm a filthy childling, so I came into it from Age of Resistance. Watching the Netflix show, vaguely knowing sort of Dark Crystal, the original film, and watched the Age of Resistance, loved it. Then sort of went back and watched the movie, and then sort of got involved in this project, and we were like, oh, okay, we need to go deeper, need to learn more, and brought Janet on.
So I didn't know the Dark Crystal as a child. Please don't fall off your seats. I'm a convert. I swear.
Those are my favorite kinds of fans.
I also didn't know the labyrinth, and so for me, this has just been an amazing world of adult discovery. So first of all, I watched the movie a few years ago when it came onto Netflix, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting, and it was so amazing and so different from any other kind of fantasy that I had seen before. And then when the Netflix show came out, I was like, okay, well, I've got to hop on this. So I watched the Netflix show. I binge watched it back to back, basically. It's the joy of Netflix, right? And the pain. So my life went on hold as I discovered the Dark Crystal universe through the movie and the series. And then I got this email. It must have been a while later saying, hey, we'd like you to write a sample scene because we might be making a Dark Crystal RPG, hint, hint. And I was like, okay, well, I cannot pass this up. So what did I do? I went and back to back watched the Netflix show all over again, like I needed an excuse, right? And then I came up with my sample scene, and the rest is history. Jack brought me onto the project as a freelancer. I don't work with Riverhorse Games as a member of staff. I'm a freelance writer among my many activities. But yeah, I'm so thrilled to be on this project, because for me it's really been rediscovering my childhood through this new IP that I had never found before, but is so, so dark yet so whimsical, yet so multifaceted and multicolored. Yeah, it's been a bit of an adventure for me, as you can hear. I've been very excited to be part of this project.
That warms my heart to hear. Those are my favorite kinds of fan stories to hear, because, I mean, as a child who grew up loving the movie and having nobody else my age who knew what it was, when I see other people discover it and fall in love with it, it just that makes my day. That's wonderful to me. And the fact that this show has opened up the doorway to so many new fans, which then opens up the doorway to things like this happening. You guys are, there's absolutely zero shame in being I just discovered it in 2019, because no, that's great. That means people are still discovering it, and that's going to keep happening hopefully thanks to this game as well. It's going to be part of that cycle. So yeah.
And that's the thing, with so many people that are sort of discovering the Dark Crystal even to this day, and even the same, with this podcast as well, I've had, someone that's oh wow, I didn't realize that there's a podcast about Dark Crystal. So
I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
I thought I was.
And it's so sort of interesting that it is very different, and it was very different at the time, obviously, but even watching it now, when you watch a lot of sort of old stuff, you go, oh yeah, this has obviously been copied, and this has been sort of the inspiration for that, and so a lot of sort of older media feels very familiar. But no, Dark Crystal is it's definitely its own thing. It's it's both whimsical and horrifying at the same time.
It's got a really unique stamp.
There's not many sort of fantasy worlds, let alone fantasy worlds with puppets, that contain a genocide in them. But on the other hand, also the deterge.
You're not wrong.
I mean, I'd love to know sort of how this came about with the Dark Crystal RPG game, because of course, you previously worked on the Labyrinth adventure game, and so I was just curious, how did it start for you, with Riverhorse, through the adventure game, and sort of how did that sort of, transitioned over, to do sort of a follow-up, but to another Jim Henson legacy property with the Dark Crystal?
It started with the Jim Henson board game, the Labyrinth board game even, and so that was very successful, very simple for families and fans of the movie, and so that went really nicely. And we also do a product called the Tales of Equestria, which is My Little Pony role-playing game. And it was kind of, this has gone well, let's try and bring sort of Labyrinth into the RPG sort of world, which it's really, really well suited for, because it is an adventure, and it is also this wonderful excuse for random puzzles and random stories. You've got the riddles of the door guards, and then you've got the cleaners, or you've got this random enemy or this random puzzle, and you can really just run away with it and not have an excuse for. You don't have to make anything make sense. You can just have a game, but it's all built in this. Yeah, and it's all in this world, and it all has this wonderful Jim Henson weirdness, as well as Brian Froud art and just beautiful is this wonderful excuse to just make something beautiful. And that was very well received, which is, unfortunately, it's all often the reason we can make more stuff is it's well received. So we have a good relationship with the Henson company. We've made a few games for them, a few products. And so we were like, okay, we've done the Labyrinth, and we don't want to do the Labyrinth again. We've taken everything and sort of poured it into this book. So what's next?
Beautiful book, can I say?
Thank you. And we've pitched in sort of the Dark Crystal. We were like, well, the Dark Crystal is, again, it's perfect, but in a different way, because there are reasons for stuff, but there's so much stuff, and then there's also there's a lot of the classic RPG stuff. I've said stuff too many times now, but there's clans, so there's different races, each with their own special abilities, and there's grand overarching sort of plots. There's different regions. There's hordes of wonderful beasts and animals and creatures and magic, and we do quite a lot of sort of licensed stuff, and it's so rare that there's something so like, oh, we don't need to make up a game. Like, we don't need to make excuses for anything. We don't have to say, oh, well, we'll have to add this bit of lore so that it's a game, or we have to like tweak this so that it's fun. This makes a good story, but it doesn't make a good game. It's quite common, sort of, in our line. But Dark Crystal was not that. It was just, oh, yeah, you've done half of this work for us. There's clans. You pick a clan, you make a character. There's we got to play around in the sort of in the sandbox. So we've sort of created our own like world-spanning adventure that you can travel around Scarif, and you're collecting these sort of mystical artifacts. And yeah, so there's a lot of like, we were allowed to sort of play in this world and sort of interconnect all of the bits of lore in our game. And yeah, no, Henson have been absolutely fantastic at just like giving us everything we need and then letting us fill in the gaps. And so yeah, that was like a year and a bit ago. No, more like 2 years now. Jeez.
Flies right by, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the discussion sort of happened like just before, sort of pretty much before, or so just a little bit after that Age of Resistance had come out.
So it would have been. It was after Age of Resistance came out, and it was just around the time where like we weren't sure whether there was going to be a second season or whether there was going to, unfortunately, not be. So yeah, it was around that time. So there was also maybe there's like, if we do this well, then we can like get a load of new lore and a load of new stuff to mess around with. But yeah, so it was around that time, and we've been working sort of on it for I think about 2 years now, which of course it was affected by lockdowns and pandemic stuff. But yeah, no, it's been in the works, and it's so fun to just be able to actually show it to people now and be like, it's a thing, it exists.
Because I mean, as of now, it's like, anyone can pre-order the game through the River Horse Games website, and I'm sure pre-orders will be available around the world from wherever retailers will have it in stock. So which is really cool.
Thank you for that. I'm terrible at plugging. Always after one of these things, my boss will be like, "You probably should have mentioned that this is for sale." This is a thing, a product you can buy.
I mean, that's a thing, I guess, like with this adventure game. I would have to think that it probably came at the right time, especially with Age of Resistance that had come out, that must have really, like, helped so much, I guess. I mean, it must have, like, really been a big benefit, I guess, with the writing process or trying to create scenes and all that kind of stuff for this adventure game.
Yeah, definitely. There's a load of, like, content, and not only sort of lore stuff like there is in the novels, but there's also just this richness of you can imagine it, you can see it, it's on the TV. You've got sort of like, there's not the clans or what they look like in the original film, but you get all these differences, and sort of that richness to the world really just helps a huge amount when writing.
Particularly when it came to, because I did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the writing, whereas Jack did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of the mechanics. So a lot of the scenes in there are mine, and we had this massive list essentially of like all the different areas of Scarith we wanted to explore. And I have to tell you, not everything made it into the book, because publishers have to go by page count and writers go by like the magic Vlayaya of our dreams, right? Like, we just want to go places and write stuff. So yeah, definitely when exploring those places, having visual guides, being able to like watch through the Netflix show and pause and take I was you can't take screenshots with Netflix. I don't know if anybody knows this. So I had my camera on my phone, taking reference photos that I could then import into my docs. World building is something that's really, really critical to me. My grown-up job, my real job, is the CEO of a world building platform called World Anvil. So obviously Dark Crystal, right up my street. It's all this glorious world building that feeds into the story and into the characters and into the motivations and everything. And so much of like little tastes of world building that you see in the series have gone into the book. So that scene where they go underneath the throne and find lore, that is a critical scene that inspired so many other scenes and mechanics and riddles, which are like so tabletop RPG, I can't even, and dungeons and everything else. This was a massive inspiration point. And I have a critical image of that I just referred to again and again, when I was like, how can I capture this? What does the music sound like? What are the facets? What is the iconography like? How do I capture the image that they've captured, where they have all of these things that they can do? And my job is to capture that in a scene so that actually the game master can then recreate that for their players. So that it's this one step removed from actually writing a book, which is something else I do, to creating material to help somebody else create the scene. So yeah, I would say the Netflix show coming out at that point, that made it the perfect time, because there was so much more audio visual material to explore. And it's, you know, there's novels and there's comics and there's everything, but like video material is so dense in information. You get so much from that yeah, I would say that has been indispensable for my part in writing the thing. And so many small influences have been like blown up large into scenes, for example.
Yep, definitely, yeah. And I guess, like, you know, we're working on a licensed game like the Dark Crystal adventure game. I mean, yeah, with the licensed game, has there been any like sort of things that you can or cannot do, or do they sort of give you pretty much like quite a bit of creative freedom to do whatever you want? Yeah.
I want to start with this because there's a line from the Henson Company to Riverhorse Games, and then there's a line from Riverhorse Games to the freelancers. And there are lots and lots of contributors. You'll find lots of scenes from different people, but again, like I wrote, I think, the bulk of them. So Jack would tell me every week we'd have a check-in meeting, and I'd be like, I'm working on this. I'm inspired by this. I've got 17 pictures of tree roots, and it's becoming a thing. And I'd go crazy, and Jack would really encourage this. And then at the end, he would take that up the food chain. So I think always from our side, from the freelancer side, we were absolutely encouraged to be as creative and as inspired by the original material as possible. And then Jack can tell you about what happens next.
We did a lot of the editing, but to be honest, it does depend on the licenser. Some licensers are very precious, but in a way that there's licensers that say no, you can't deviate from anything that's known and for sure, and there's licensers that are, oh, let's work this out, like, no, we can't allow this because that might contradict something that we might do in the future, or it might, this part of the world is a bit more sort of blank than we know. But so what we were allowed to do is we sort of basically at the very start of the book there is, in fact, I can read it. So on sort of literally the first page is the sort of intro, and it says, a dark blight creeps through Thrar, poisoning body and mind alike. Those stories are set in stone. It is time for something different, for a story set in flame. The whispers of prophecy hang on the wind, like smoke on the water. Thrar is primed for you to take your place among the great heroes of old. Nothing in these pages is truth, except that which you choose to believe. Will the flames of resistance stir in your heart? Will you be a spark of light against the darkening? Will you help protect Thrar so she can rise once more from the ashes? So what that's saying is, nothing in this book is real.
Yeah.
Like,
Unreliable
Yeah,
narrator.
yes.
because at the end of the day, it's a role-playing game. You get to make the choices, and of course, you could say, "Oh, Fra turns into a bean on day 3." Like, we're not in control of that. So of course, nothing in there is canon. But what that gave us was like, oh, everything obviously needs to be in theme, and we can take all these deep lore cuts and things. But in the future, if Henson wanted to, of course, they could say none of that. No, ignore that. We're doing stuff now. But that being said, they were super helpful and super keen on sort of making sure that we had stuff correct, but in a constructive way rather than they would say, oh, make sure that you include this, and make sure that if you're going to do this, then you should probably have B, C, and D. Whereas other licenses sometimes, I will name no names, but say, oh, we don't know precisely what's here, so don't do anything with it. Okay, I guess. But in a role-playing game, that's really difficult, because you can't just say nothing's there, because players might go there, and you want to have an answer for them. And so, they were super helpful with that. And so, it's been a delight to work with them. What we have found, interestingly, is that they are more accepting of us sort of creating new things than they are us sort of changing or creating sort of offshoots of things. So we had I think a race of sort of mushroom podlings in Grot, sort of sporlings. I think they're still called sporlings, but basically with a chat with Henson, they weren't super happy with sort of changing the podling, sort of having this adjacent creature. Just like we've got boblings in there, which are the sort of the sea podlings. So we sort of removed, we removed that podling sort of connection, and they're still called sporlings, but there's no mention of them being sort of related to podlings in any way. And so that's sort of they're happy with a new creature, but less often with sort of a mixing and a changing of the sort of established canon creatures. And there's a 1,000 little like notes and tweaks and sort of finessing and getting stuff in the style, but no, they've been super helpful and allowing for us to create new content.
Well, plus the beautiful thing about an RPG is that then if an individual GM at his table with his friends wants to just decide, they're actually, they're the cousins of podlings. Don't tell Henson, but at our table they are. Like, we're not going to swoop in and be like, beep, beep, fiction police. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can do that in an RPG. And there's so much freedom that's granted with this method of opening up worlds. And it's so aptly timed. And as tragic as it is that we don't, as of yet, have a season 2 for the show, this gives us a way to create our own season 2 and 3 and 4 and 47. So it's very aptly timed.
It is actually set pretty much sort of the day after season 1 ends. It is set in that sort of that time frame and that world. So it's very much you decide what happens next.
Yeah, awesome. And the way that everything has sort of been written in the Dark Crystal canon already has, and we've talked about it in a million other episodes about how there's always that kind of unreliable narrator, how all of the different, the comics, the graphic novels, the show, the movie, creation myths, they're all told from the perspective of different storytellers, so the different narratives don't necessarily always match up, but they shake hands. And the idea of the RPG just fits very organically with the way that the Dark Crystal, all of it, has already been up until this point. It has that built-in freedom already. So, I guess then I would have to ask, was that something that was considered as to why the Dark Crystal makes sense as a fit for an RPG? Or was it just like, this just makes sense after Labyrinth? Or was there sort of that mentality?
there was definitely the idea that we have a good relationship with Henson, and we are looking for sort of what's the best way of making this license into a thing. But the idea of taking this license and going, oh, it's an RPG. Like, they have a lot of stuff that we sort of have looked at and gone, we can't really make this into a thing. The Fraggle Rock RPG probably isn't isn't going to set the world on fire. But no, it's kind of a happy. Okay, noted. The Fraggle
I'd buy
Rock
it. Listen, I'd buy it. Says Henson on it. I'm buying it.
Yeah, so it was kind of like, oh, this, we want to do something, and we want to do it with you guys. Oh, this works perfectly, and like that, just every step of the way, it's, oh no, this really really works. There's just so, and the fact that Dark Crystal, much more so than Labyrinth, has all of this sort of extra lore and this extra sort of content to draw from, really just helps flesh out that world. I mean that I think I was saying before the call, like it's really, everyone's going to think we're really creative, whereas actually we've just taken notes mostly of stuff that exists and then just translated it into you come across check the notes, a thing that someone else has written. And sort of weaving this all together, as you say, shaking hands with the other media, taking all of this inspiration from everything. I remember Janet, we gave her the impossible task of basically whenever she included something that was from the lore, to put a little note sort of for the editors and for Henson, basically saying where that thing was from. So it'd be like the Omeya, oh, that's from novel, the Ties of the Dark Crystal, and sort of you take that and you say this thing exists from this area, kind of, so we could go to Henson with our our guns ready, sort of like, okay, if you question us on this, we know it is in the lore, it's from this.
But I have to say, there was a huge amount of prep work for that. So when I said yes, I want to write this thing, I wrote the sample scene. Jack said, okay, this is terrible, we want you to write the rest. It's very nice. He then went, "Gadoomph, here is everything. You must consume it," which is all of the graphic novels, the creation books, the bestiary, all of the young adult novels, of course, the series I watched countless times building this thing, and the original movie as well. And then I literally, every time I was going through something, I would find something and make a note. I'd find the name of a peach and I'd write it down. I'd find the name of a herb and I'd write it down. I was constantly looking for these references and looking for places where we could give the GM tools to make amazing stories for their players. And of which, of course, for an RPG writing space, that's our job, right? We write scenes and we write fun things that you can interact with, and like lots of adventure hooks and things to play with. And then the GM is the one that actually tells the story. The GM is the narrator. The players are the characters that make choices and poke the things and see what happens. Generally, all hell breaks loose. We love it. So yeah, there was a huge amount of this sort of very detailed research. Again, I'm a world building nerd, right? So I was all up for this. Literally sort of writing down bit by bit where things were, what they were, where they were mentioned, how they were mentioned, who they were related to, so that we could stay true to the lore as much as possible. Even though, of course, we call it on contact. Does it survive contact? If we give it to a GM, is it still recognizably the Dark Crystal? Well, in a way, that doesn't matter as long as everyone's having fun, of course. But we do our best to provide everyone with materials. So yeah, lots of research went into that, but I think it was worth it. We got a lot of cool stuff from different spaces packed into there. So if you're a real Dark Crystal nerd and you've read everything like I now have multiple times, look out for them, because there's weird stuff everywhere. I think Tugroot is mentioned in like episode 1 of the Netflix show, and it causes uncontrollable flatulence, and I was like, I'm using it. So it's in there. At least it's in there if it hasn't been edited out. I don't know what happened to edits.
It is in there.
Yes,
Yeah.
Troll
Very-
flatulence for the
Has
win.
a very
First thing I'm looking
place
for
in
when
the
I get the
Black
book.
Duck
Where is it?
Institute.
Yeah, where's that reference?
So yeah, those throwaway references, we really tried to weave everything in as much as possible because as Jack said, it's such a rich IP already.
And that concludes part 1 of our chat with Jack and Janet. We hope that you enjoyed that special presentation, and stay tuned for part 2 of our interview as part of the Thralloween. If you want to know more about the podcast, you can just visit our website at darkcrystalpodcast.com. We're also on many podcast platforms, and on social media as well. So if you just did a search for Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal Podcast, or Dark Crystal Podcast, you'll probably find us very easily. So we'll just wrap it up. Thank you, and definitely stay tuned for more Thralloween.